5 of us stood in the dimly lit lobby, staring at the ancient elevator doors that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The air was thick with dust, and the faint hum of machinery far beneath us was the only sound. The old building had been abandoned for decades, yet here we were, drawn by rumors of something hidden deep below, something that defied explanation. None of us really knew what we were getting into. It was supposed to be an adventure, just another crazy idea that Mark had come up with. "We're explorers, right?" he had said, his blue eyes gleaming with excitement. "We owe it to ourselves to find out what's down there." His voice had a way of convincing us, even when the smart thing to do was to turn around and never look back. I glanced at the others. There was Eva, her black hair tied back in a tight ponytail, her eyes betraying her usual calm facade. Beside her stood Lucas, always the skeptic, his brow furrowed as he peered at the elevator's tarnished brass buttons. Sarah and James huddled together, whispering about what might await us below, their faces pale but determined. "Ready?" Mark asked, breaking the silence. He was already holding the rusted gate open, gesturing for us to step inside. With a collective nod, we piled into the cramped elevator car. The doors clanged shut with a metallic echo, sealing us inside as if we were stepping into a tomb. I felt my heart quicken, the oppressive air in the car pressing down on me. The walls were lined with mirrors, their surfaces cracked and discolored, reflecting our nervous faces back at us in a distorted, unsettling way. Mark pressed the button labeled B6, the lowest level on the panel. It was covered in a layer of grime, as if no one had touched it in years. The elevator jolted to life, descending slowly, the grinding of the gears above us filling the silence. "Feels like we're going straight to hell," Lucas muttered, half joking, half serious. We descended deeper and deeper, the floors ticking by in a slow, deliberate sequence. B1, B2, B3. The air grew colder, and the light from the single bulb above us flickered ominously. We exchanged nervous glances, the reality of our situation starting to sink in. B4, B5, and then nothing. The elevator shuddered to a halt. The light above us flickered once more before plunging us into darkness. A gasp escaped from Sarah, and I could feel the panic rising within me. "What the hell?" Mark cursed, his voice strained. We stood there in the pitch black, the silence heavy, as if the very air was holding its breath. Then, slowly, a soft light began to emanate from the cracks in the elevator doors, casting an eerie glow that barely illuminated our faces. "We need to get out of here," Eva whispered, her voice trembling. Mark forced the doors open, revealing a narrow corridor lined with cold, damp stone. The walls seemed to breathe, a faint, rhythmic pulse that I could feel through my boots. The air was thick with a strange, metallic scent, and there was something else. A faint, almost imperceptible whispering, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. We stepped out into the corridor, our footsteps echoing hollowly. The elevator closed behind us with a final, ominous clank, as if sealing our fate. The corridor stretched on for what felt like miles, the light growing brighter the further we walked. None of us spoke. The silence was too oppressive, too fragile, as if a single word would shatter it and bring whatever was lurking in the shadows upon us. And then we saw it, the source of the light. A large, circular chamber opened up before us, its walls covered in strange, pulsating symbols that seemed to shift and writhe as we approached. In the center of the room stood a massive, black obelisk, its surface smooth and polished, reflecting the unnatural light in a way that made my skin crawl. But it was what hovered above the obelisk that froze us in our tracks. An entity unlike anything I had ever seen, suspended in the air. It had no discernible shape. At times it seemed to be a swirling mass of darkness, at others a faintly humanoid figure. Its form flickered and shifted, as if it existed between this world and another. The whispering grew louder, coming from the entity itself, an unintelligible chant that reverberated through the chamber and into our very bones. For a moment, none of us moved. None of us breathed. We were trapped in its gaze, if it even had eyes, paralyzed by a terror that I had never known before. What is that?" Sarah whimpered, her voice barely audible. Before anyone could answer, the entity surged forward, its form expanding and contracting with a terrifying fluidity. I felt a cold wind rush past me, and then it was inside the chamber, its presence overwhelming. The whispers became screams, filling our minds with a cacophony of voices, each one more desperate and deranged than the last. Mark shouted something, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the entity. I felt it push against me, a pressure building inside my head, my vision blurring as I stumbled back. The others were no better off. Lucas was clutching his head, Eva had fallen to her knees, and James and Sarah were holding each other, their faces contorted in agony. Then, as suddenly as it began, the entity recoiled, shrinking back into a tight, compact mass above the obelisk. The screams stopped, replaced by a low, guttural hum that vibrated through the chamber. I blinked, trying to clear my head, but the damage was done. "Get out," Mark rasped, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the exit. "We need to get out of here now." We fled back down the corridor, the entity's presence still clawing at our minds, the whispers lingering like a bad dream. The elevator was waiting for us, the doors mercifully open. We piled in, Mark slamming the button for the lobby repeatedly, as if he could will the elevator to move faster. The ascent was agonizingly slow, the silence in the car broken only by our ragged breathing. I could still feel the entity, its touch lingering like a cold sweat on my skin, but the further we rose, the weaker it became. Finally, the doors opened to the lobby, the familiar sight almost surreal after what we had just experienced. We staggered out, collapsing onto the floor, gasping for air. What the hell just happened? Lucas panted, his face ashen. No one had an answer. The only thing we knew was that we had disturbed something that should have been left alone, something that didn't belong in our world. As we sat there, trying to make sense of the horrors we had witnessed, none of us noticed the faint, dark mist that clung to our clothes, nor the way it seemed to seep into the air around us, dispersing into the world above. It wasn't until we returned home that we realized the full extent of what we had unleashed. The whispers, once confined to that underground chamber, had followed us. They grew louder with each passing day, infecting our thoughts, our dreams, our very souls. And then the sickness started. It began with a fever, a burning sensation that no medicine could quell. The doctors were baffled. They had never seen anything like it. The fever spread quickly, jumping from us to our families, our friends, our neighbors. It wasn't long before the entire city was gripped by the mysterious illness. The news called it a pandemic, a new virus of unknown origin. But we knew the truth. We had unleashed something ancient, something malevolent, and now it was loose in the world above, feeding on the living, spreading like wildfire. The news called it a pandemic, a new virus of unknown origin. But we knew the truth. We had unleashed something ancient, something malevolent, and now it was loose in the world above, feeding on the living, spreading like wildfire. And as I sit here, writing this, I can hear the whispers again. They're getting louder. The entity is coming. It won't stop until it consumes us all. The whispers clawed at the edges of my mind, their insidious tendrils curling through my thoughts, making it nearly impossible to focus. Each night, the entity's presence grew stronger in my dreams, a dark, suffocating mass that pressed down on my chest, squeezing the breath from my lungs. Sleep had become a battleground, a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurred into a singular, unending torment. I wasn't the only one suffering. Mark, Eva, Lucas, Sarah, and James, my friends, my companions in this damn journey, were all feeling it too. We had tried to keep in touch, to reassure one another that everything would be okay. But as the sickness spread, our calls became fewer and more frantic. Each time there was less comfort and more fear. Mark was the first to lose control. The once confident, fearless leader had become a shell of himself, his eyes hollow, skin pale and slick with sweat. When I last spoke to him, he was rambling about visions, twisted, horrific images of the entity consuming the world, one person at a time. He talked about trying to warn people about finding a way to stop it, but his words were jumbled, incoherent. "I can still hear them, man," he whispered over the phone, his voice barely audible. "The whispers. They're telling me things, terrible things." 2 days later, I found out he had been admitted to a psychiatric ward. He had tried to claw his own ears out to silence the whispers. Eva disappeared soon after. She had always been the strongest of us, the one who kept her cool when everything around us fell apart. But the strain was too much. Her final message was a text, a single word: "Sorry." The police found her car at the edge of a cliff, the door open, the engine still running. They never found her body. Sarah and James were next. Their love had been their anchor, the one thing that kept them grounded. But whatever bond they shared wasn't strong enough to hold back the darkness. They succumbed to the sickness together, dying within hours of each other. The doctors said it was the virus, that their bodies just couldn't fight it off. But I knew better. The entity had taken them just as it was taking all of us. That left Lucas and me. I couldn't bear to call him, couldn't bear to hear the fear in his voice, to face the reality that we were the last ones left. Instead, I isolated myself, locked in my apartment, the curtains drawn tight to keep out the outside world. But it wasn't the outside world I feared. It was what was inside, what was growing stronger with every passing day. The whispers had become a constant, a low, droning chant that echoed through my mind, urging me to do things, terrible things. I fought them off as best I could, but I was losing the battle. The darkness was spreading, consuming me from within. I could feel it in my veins, a cold, pulsing energy that grew stronger with every breath. It was a plague not just of the body, but of the soul. Then one night, as I lay in bed, too afraid to sleep, I heard something new. A voice, clearer than the others, cutting through the whispers like a knife through flesh. "It's time," the voice said, deep and resonant, filled with a terrible authority. "Come to me." My heart pounded in my chest, fear surging through me. I didn't want to obey. Every instinct screamed at me to resist, to fight back, but my body moved on its own, rising from the bed and walking to the door. My hands shook as I grabbed my keys, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I stepped out into the cold, empty night. The streets were deserted, a ghost town in the wake of the pandemic. Houses were dark, windows shattered, the occasional flicker of a television screen the only sign of life. But even those were few and far between. The city was dying just as we were. The voice guided me, pulling me toward a destination I dreaded with every fiber of my being. I knew where it was leading me. I knew what waited for me there. The building loomed before me, its facade crumbling and worn, the elevator doors now sealed tight with heavy chains. But the voice didn't lead me to the elevator. Instead, it pulled me around the back of the building, to a narrow alleyway that I had never noticed before. There, hidden beneath layers of grime and decay, was a door, old, rusted, and barely hanging on its hinges. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob, but the voice was insistent, driving me forward. The door creaked open, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. The smell hit me first, an overpowering stench of rot and decay that made me gag. But the voice compelled me forward, down into the bowels of the earth, into the place where it all began. The stairs seemed endless, twisting and turning in impossible ways, the darkness growing thicker with every step. The whispers grew louder, the chanting becoming a deafening roar, until I could barely hear my own thoughts. Finally, the stairs ended, and I found myself in a cavernous chamber, far larger than the one we had discovered before. The walls were lined with the same pulsating symbols, but these were more vibrant, more alive. They thrummed with energy, casting a sickly green light that made my skin crawl. And there, in the center of the chamber, stood the entity. It was no longer the flickering, amorphous shape we had first encountered. Now it was fully formed, a towering figure of darkness, its body writhing with shadows, eyes like burning coals piercing through the gloom. The whispers ceased as I stepped into the chamber, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed down on me, suffocating and oppressive. The entity's gaze locked onto mine, and I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. "You have brought it to the surface," the entity spoke, its voice a deep rumble that shook the very ground beneath my feet. "The world above will be consumed. All life will end, and I shall reign." "No," I whispered, though my voice was weak, barely a breath. "I won't let you. You cannot stop what has already begun," the entity replied, a cruel smile twisting its features. "The virus is but the first wave. Soon, I will emerge fully, and your world will crumble." Desperation clawed at me, a wild, frantic need to stop this madness, to undo what we had done. But I was powerless, standing before a force far greater than anything I could comprehend. "Why us?" I choked out, tears burning in my eyes. "Why did you choose us?" "You were the first to come," the entity said, as if the answer were obvious. "The first to unlock the door. You were merely a means to an end." I fell to my knees, the weight of the truth crushing me. We had been pawns, nothing more than tools in the hands of an ancient evil. And now the world would pay the price for our curiosity, for our hubris. But even as I knelt there, broken and defeated, a spark of defiance flared within me. I couldn't stop what had been unleashed, but I could still fight. I could still resist. With a strength I didn't know I had, I rose to my feet, meeting the entity's gaze with a newfound resolve. "You may have started this," I said, my voice steady now, "but I won't let you finish it." The entity laughed, a deep, malevolent sound that echoed through the chamber. "And how do you plan to stop me, mortal?" it sneered. "You are nothing." I didn't have an answer. I didn't have a plan. All I had was the will to fight, to push back against the darkness, even if it cost me everything. And then, in the corner of my vision, I saw it. A faint glimmer of light, small and distant, but growing brighter. It was coming from the symbols on the walls, their glow intensifying as if responding to my defiance. The entity noticed too, its laughter fading as it turned its gaze toward the light. "What is this?" it hissed, a note of uncertainty creeping into its voice. I didn't know what it was either, but I felt a strange pull toward it, an instinctual understanding that this light was something the entity feared. I stepped closer to the walls, raising my hand to touch one of the symbols. The moment my fingers brushed the surface, the light surged, flooding the chamber with a blinding brilliance. The entity recoiled, a roar of fury and pain filling the air as the light seared its form, burning away the shadows. I felt the power of the light flow through me, filling me with a warmth that drove back the cold, the fear, the whispers. It was a force of pure, untainted energy, ancient and powerful, the antithesis of the entity's darkness. With a cry, I channeled the light toward the entity, willing it to banish the darkness, to seal it away forever. The chamber trembled, the walls shaking as the light and shadow clashed in a battle of wills. The entity fought back, its form twisting and writhing as it struggled to resist the light. But it was weakening, its power waning as the light grew stronger, brighter, more overwhelming. And then, with a final, ear-splitting roar, the entity was consumed, its form disintegrating into nothingness, the shadows.